Recently, Ubiquiti released the UniFi Design Center, which is a tool that is made for UniFi installers such as myself to upload a floor plan and basically design out a complete, surveillance, network, access, VoIP, whatever you want. Anything UniFi you can design out at design.ui.com. Now, I was not aware of this website until just very recently, so I finally got my hands on it. I took a look and I decided it would be a fun idea to create a network for the good folks down at the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in Scranton, Pennsylvania. That, of course, is famously the office from The Office, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at the UniFi Design Center and see how we would design the office, right? Okay, so here we go. This is a floor plan of the office. You can find this online anywhere. Download it. The hardest part was coming up with the scale. And the way that I used the scale was basically I took the size of a single doorway and I made that 3 feet because I think that's about standard doorway size. And then everything else, scales appropriately. When we first get in here, basically we can upload our floor plan, set it to scale, and then we have these options in the top left-hand corner. We have our devices. So what kind of devices? Cables, racks, wall sockets. Workspace is basically a group of plugs. So for instance, we can say 16 ports, 12 ports, 8 ports, 4 ports, etc. Then we have all of our routing, switching, access points, cameras, and then we have the UniFi Access, the UniFi VoIP, and even the UniFi LED stuff is all in here. For the purposes of this video, however, I'm only going to be focusing on surveillance and network. We also have our rack design here, and then we can also create our walls, right? So we have outer walls, inner walls, and then divider walls, which would be like glass or other sort of thin material. So basically, I did a real quick SketchUp of the walls. I did outer walls all around the perimeter, and then I covered every single inner wall, or almost every single inner wall, with walls. In fact, I see that I just missed one here at Daryl's office. So let's go ahead and add another inner wall here. Just click on it, and then you just want to basically click, and click, and click. Now, Daryl's office has some windows. I'm not going to take the time to put in windows, but you certainly could get that detailed if you wanted to. Now, the reason that the walls are important is for the Wi-Fi coverage and the camera coverage, which I'm not going to show you yet, but we will get to as I go through this process. So we're going to start at the rack. Now, I put the rack here in Ryan's office. If you remember in, I think, later seasons of The Office, Ryan was in that tiny little closet that was off of the kitchen. Well, I figured that's probably the most ideal place for a full server rack or just even a partial rack. The options that they have for racks are pretty limited. If we come over here to racks, we have 24U communications rack, so basically an existing rack, or you can do a UniFi rack, 24U, or you can add the Smart Power RPS. So in this case, I just used a 24U rack, though really you don't need that big of a rack for this particular deployment. If we click on the rack, here we can see the choices that I went with for inside the rack. It's really only going to take up 5 U. Little bit of extra space if you wanted to add in a battery backup, and then a little bit of extra space if you additionally wanted to add in the UniFi RPS, which I did not do either of those for the purposes of this design. What I did do, however, though, was create two separate, or I started with the Dream Machine Pro, right? Because it's for this size office, this small office where you've got, less than 50 network connections for the entire office, and you want surveillance as well as UniFi, as well as a firewall, the Dream Machine Pro is going to be a good fit for this office. So we added the Dream Machine Pro. Then we added two 48-port switches. Now, look at this. We've got how many slots are being used, 6 out of 24, and then we have how many PoE ports are being used, right? We have 96 total PoE ports because I added 2 of the USW 48 PoE switches. These are the Gen 2 48-port switches. Now, we don't actually need 2 48-port switches. And in fact, if you turn this on manual, it's just going to take the number of links that you have. So see this cable link here? Out to this pod of 4 network jacks. This is a pod of 2 network jacks, and we'll go through all those in just a second, but just so you're aware, it takes those and it calculates the total number of ports that you're going to need, switch ports that you're going to need for any particular deployment. After I did this whole design, we came up with essentially 43 ports, right? So basically 43 Ethernet ports throughout this office. So if I turn this on manual, it's only going to give me one 48 port switch because it's less than 48 ports total. However, when I design a system like this personally, I like to add a layer of redundancy in there, right? You're not, in the overall cost of the project, adding a second 48 port switch is not going to be that detrimental to the price. Like, you're not going to lose the bid because you added some redundancy. The second 48 port switch that I would add in here, let's go ahead and add this again, is basically so that if either one of these switches dies in the next, say, 5 years, either one can take the load of the entire office temporarily while you replace the failed switch, right? So we're really, it's, however much, $700 or whatever those switches cost, you're spending that money as insurance against possible downtime in the future, right? So if that switch goes offline, you're going to have some downtime if you just have one switch, whereas if you have two switches where either switch can take the full load and you're kind of just distributing all the connections between them, of course, if either one goes down, the office is still going to be up. You might have to quickly repatch a bunch of stuff at the rack, but you can still have the office mostly online. So UDM Pro and then a couple of PoE switches, and then I added a couple of these patch panels in here. I think these are 24 port patch panels. And that's all we have for network equipment. The next thing that I started to do was I went around the office and I figured, where would we want to put Ethernet jacks, right? And so what they have here are what do they call them? Workspaces, right? So a workspace is basically cable connections for two people, which is 4 ports. So it's just a little, 4-port box. Then they have cable connections for 4 people, which is an 8-port box. So what they're basically saying here is we are going to assume that we're going to use 2 Ethernet connections per person, right? So I don't go that extreme, right? I don't think we need to do that. And I'll show you guys where we put, where I installed all of the different pods. And it looks like actually I missed one. So let me add a new cable while I'm looking at this, because that might push the total number of ports necessary up over 48, but maybe not. Let's see here. So I'm going to come in here, cables. We're going to use this UniFi cable Cat6 CMP. We're going to click on this. We're going to, we got to move this around. We're going to click on the rack, and then we're going to click on this workspace over here. And now if we look at the rack again, we can see that the total number has gone up to 47 out of 96 instead of 43, which it was previously. So that is a workspace of 4 jacks here. I figured, one would be for the printer that's behind Aaron, one would be for the surveillance camera, and then you've got 2 extra jacks. One can be for Aaron's desk, and then maybe Aaron's VoIP phone, or some other device that might be at the receptionist area. I have another pod down here for accounting. This is Angela, Kevin, and Oscar. So we've basically got a pod of 4 Ethernet jacks here, one for each of these folks, and then one for the camera. Also, if I remember correctly from the show, they have some sort of printers or something back in this area as well. So I put another 4 ports over here by Meredith and Creed, assuming that they would each use 1 port, and then we'd have an extra 2 ports for other stuff that might be along this wall, such as a printer. And there's a door right here, which is weird. I don't ever remember a door being there in the office in the show, and if it was there, where did that door go? I don't know. Then we have another pod of 4 devices for Jim, Dwight, and Pam. We have another pod of 4 Ethernet ports for Andy, Phyllis, and Stanley, and then I figured that we could probably share, although this is in the ceiling. So you know what? Let me run an extra cable out to, did I run a cable to this pod? I did. Okay, so let's run a cable out to this Nano HD access point, which is the access points that I went ahead. I went for 2 Nano HDs to cover the office. So we've got 1 here and 1 here. Let me run a cable directly to those to the Nano HD. This one I think can run off this workspace over here, but let me run a cable directly to this one. Now the interesting thing about running cables in the design center, so here we have cables, boom. We're just going to say click on the rack and click on the Nano HD, and there we have an extra cable. The interesting thing about running cables is that you can actually add like ladder rack, and then you can run cables along specific routes. So for instance, if we wanted this cable to go across into this wall and then sort of all the way over and then over to that access point, we can adjust it by right-clicking on the cable and adding a point. So now we grab our point, and let's say we'll put it right up here in the wall, directly off of the rack. Let me move this so it's a little easier to see. We put that directly there. Let's right-click again and add another point. And we're going to drag that over here to this portion of the wall. In fact, actually, let's drag it all the way straight across to right about here. And then it'll run up there. So it kind of allows you to more closely estimate the cable length requirements for your particular deployment. If you have ladder rack, you can actually put ladder rack on here as well, and then just run those cables in the ladder rack. It doesn't do it automatically. You do have to actually, click and create points to run those cables around those areas. And you can see here in most cases I did not do that, but I did do it a couple times over here, like for some of these cameras. So there we have one nano HD that sort of covers the whole front of the office. And over here at Daryl's office, we have 2 switch ports, or 2 Ethernet ports. In Michael's office, we have 2 Ethernet ports. We have 4 Ethernet ports in the conference room. And then let's go over here to the back portion of the office, where we have another nano HD access point. So this nano HD access point is basically just going to run off of this workspace of 4 Ethernet ports here. So we have the annex, right? And then we've got Toby. I put another 4 Ethernet ports over near Toby because I figure there's also probably printers, maybe other devices back here that you might want to use. And I put another 4 over by Kelly. And I always think it's just better to run extra cable while you're running cable rather than having to add more cable after the fact, which is going to be much more expensive. Over here in the break room, I put 4 Ethernet ports, and then I ran 1 Ethernet port directly to this camera up over here. So again, if we total everything up from the rack, we are now at exactly 48 ports, which is one of these 48 port switches. But again, I don't feel comfortable completely maxing out a 48 port switch for an office like this. I prefer to have some redundancy, so that's why I added 2 of those switches, and you can sort of just, patch them half and half. All right, so let's take a look at the wireless portion of this map. Right here we have some filters. Now the filters allow us to sort of change things around a little bit. We can change around our icon size, make things bigger or smaller, depending on what we want. I'm going to put this down to say right about there. Looks good. And then we can also turn on our coverage. Not only our coverage for 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz wireless, but also our camera coverage. So we're going to get to the cameras in a second, but let's look at 2.4 gigahertz coverage. Here we can see, with the walls in place, this is sort of estimating what we can expect in these areas. So of course, red is a very strong signal, and then as we get towards blue and purple, like down here outside, that is a weaker signal. This setup is perfectly fine for this office. We've got 2 nano HDs, again, full coverage with the areas where most people are sitting. It's going to hit these offices and the conference room no problem. We're going to hit the break room and the annex area no problem, and we should even get coverage in the restrooms and in the kitchen. If we now look at our 5 gigahertz coverage, we should see that shrink just a little bit because 5 gigahertz does not penetrate as well as 2.4 gigahertz, but we still have very decent coverage for this entire office. We have coverage where we need it, and that's what matters. All right, next let's talk about cameras. Now, cameras for this office, I did not go with any exterior cameras in this deployment. I went with interior cameras for the office only. Now, I'm not interested in being Big Brother and having cameras watching over the backs of my employees all day long. Some people might want to put a camera system that's that extreme. The design that I did for this particular deployment was not that extreme. All I'm trying to do here is cover all of our entrances and exits, right? So that if anyone comes into this office, we are going to see them come in and we're going to see them leave. And there's no way that you can escape the view of a camera anywhere that you can get in or out of this office. So let's start over here. Now, when we add a camera, we'll start over here behind Aaron. This is basically for the front door. Let me turn on my camera coverage. There we can see. Now I'm looking at my camera coverage. So when you add a camera, these are all the G3 dome cameras that I use because I like the dome cameras for an office environment. They're really low profile. Doesn't really look like you've got cameras in your face all day. If you click on the dome camera, you've then got this little blue line, which is the angle that the camera can see. So you can actually drag this line around and put the camera and the view of the camera where it needs to be. So in this case, we're putting a dome basically on the wall right here, and we are going to adjust that dome so that we're capturing this front door right here. So anyone coming in the main entrance, the main front door is going to be on this camera. These dome cameras, though, are flat against the wall, and so I think they're kind of just, they don't really have much range of motion, so it might be more like this is what the camera can see. I don't recall exactly. If you have a situation where you need to kind of put it on a wall but then have the camera at an angle, you'd probably want to use a bullet camera or the G3 micro camera instead of these dome cameras. But just for the purposes of this drawing, I use the dome cameras everywhere. All right, the next camera I have here is right above accounting, and this camera I kind of just have generally pointing into the office, but the most important thing this camera is seeing is this door down here at the bottom of the office. Again, I don't know where that door leads. I don't remember if they ever showed that in the show, but if anyone ever does come through this door, I mean, it's probably to some hallway or something like that. If anyone ever does come through the door, this camera will pick it up. And then the next camera we have is over here, outside of the conference room. And this camera is on the wall to pick up anyone coming in the door from the stairs over here. And then finally, we have two more cameras in the back, basically on each side. We've got one over here by Kelly's side of the office where we have a door, and then we have one over here by the break room where again we have a door coming in from the stairs. So we are fully covered with these cameras. Basically no one's going to get in or out of this building or this office without us catching them on camera. Now, once you are fully satisfied with your Ubiquiti design, you can then look at the full topology, right? So here we can see the different switches. It looks like everything by default did just go to one of the switches, but that's okay. And it looks like they even have pricing here. Yeah, if you zoom in, you can actually see pricing, but I'm not sure why this one down here, USW Pro 48 port switch and USW, oh, this one's not the Pro switch, that's why. All right, well, we're going to upgrade to the Pro switch for both of these because why not, right? We're not spending real money. Let's go back to our floor plan. Click here. This is the 48-port PoE switch. This is the 48-port Pro PoE switch. Let's remove this one. And let's add another Pro switch. There we go. Okay, so if we add another Pro switch, we go to our topology. Now this Pro switch is $10.99. Okay. Of course, again, I would split these up, and it doesn't show that these cameras down here are connected to anything because on the, like for instance, this one over here, I don't have the camera directly connected. I suppose I could run a wire. Let's see, can you run a wire between this workspace and this camera? Let's try that. Now, it doesn't look like you can. So it looks like for the most part, they want everything to be a home run all the way to the main rack or the main switches over here. That's okay. We can just, work with what we've got. Now, once you're happy with the floor plan, once you're happy with the topology, you can come over here and click on the bill of materials. And now the bill of materials is going to show you the quantity and everything that you have in here. So this is going to give us one 3-pack of the G3 domes. It's going to give us another 2 individual unit G3 domes. Here we have our 2 Pro USW Pro 48 switches, the Dream Machine Pro, 2 Nano HDs, and we can see that everything is currently in stock at Ubiquiti. Here's all of our pricing. For the rack, we have the UniFi Rack 24U, which actually I didn't even know they made a UniFi Rack 24U, with PDU. We have a couple of patch panels, and we have some cables. The only thing that looks like it's not in stock are these patch cables. Now, they have 96 patch cables. We would not need 96 patch cables in this case, but they did add them. So again, adjust this as necessary. And then we have some of our keystone jacks, the UniFi keystone jacks, RJ45 connector, 50 packs, and then here is our cable. So they want basically 3 boxes of 1,000-foot cable, which actually would probably be a little bit more than that when you consider that not everything is coming out of the rack directly to those different workspaces, the different sets of 4 Ethernet ports. Mostly it would be going through walls or above the in ladder rack and stuff like that above the ceiling. So this would probably be closer to like 4 boxes of cable, maybe more. And then down here we have a couple of wall sockets. They're $1 each. And you can see basically total price for this deployment, and you can even just check out right here. Add everything to the cart and go ahead and check out. So there you have it, a look at the UniFi Design Center and how I would personally deploy the office, the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company office from the office. Let me know what you guys think. If you agree with my decisions, if you would have done anything differently, I'd love to hear about that. Put that down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please click subscribe. My name's Chris with Crosstalk Solutions, and thank you so much for watching.